I didn't pull my hand back when his fingers brushed it. That was the moment. The exact second I knew something inside me had already stepped over a line I'd spent years defending. We were standing too close, close enough that I could feel the warmth of him, the quiet awareness of his breath changing when mine did. My heart was loud in my ears. Not racing yet. Worse. Slow. Decided. I remember thinking, if I move now, I can still pretend this never happened. I didn't move. There was a look in his eyes, careful, searching, like he was waiting to see if I would flinch. I didn't. And when I met his gaze fully this time, something settled between us. Heavy. Shared. Dangerous. That was when the panic hit. Not the kind that makes you run, but the kind that makes you very still. The kind that whispers, you're already here. I let him see it. The hesitation. The want I hadn't named yet. And I didn't look away. Didn't start like this. It never does. We met in the most forgettable way. One of those places where people pass through without leaving a mark. Midday light. Neutral conversation. Safe smiles. He noticed me because I laughed too easily at something that wasn't funny. I noticed him because he didn't fill the silence when it stretched between us. He let it exist. That should have been my warning. Our first real interaction felt harmless. Almost dull. Comment about timing. About coincidence. The kind of exchange you forget as soon as it ends. But I remember the pause after, how neither of us walked away right away. How my body stayed angled toward him, even when my mind told me there was no reason to. I told myself it was nothing. That noticing someone isn't a crime. That curiosity doesn't mean intent. I had a life already. A routine. A ring that rested against my skin like proof of who I was supposed to be. But something in me was already tired. Quietly. Privately. And when he asked a question that wasn't polite, but personal, I answered without thinking. Too honestly. Too quickly. That was the first crack. Not desire. Not yet. Just the feeling of being seen in a way that made my chest ache. I remember going home afterward and replaying his voice in my head, hating myself for how easily it stayed there. I remember standing in front of the mirror and wondering when I started wanting to feel chosen instead of known. By the time our hands touched again weeks later, I understood something I hadn't wanted to admit. This wasn't an accident anymore. And I wasn't as innocent as I kept pretending. The next time I saw him, my body reacted before my thoughts did. That frightened me more than anything. Nothing happened at first, nothing anyone could point to. We spoke the way people speak when they're pretending there's no history, even though something has already settled into the space between them. Polite. Careful. But every word felt loaded, like we were both testing how close we could stand without touching. I noticed details I had no reason to notice. The way his voice dropped when he said my name. The pause before he answered simple questions like he was choosing honesty over safety. I hated how aware I was of my own posture, how my shoulders tilted toward him, how my hands kept still at my sides as if they were afraid of themselves. I kept reminding myself of who I was supposed to be, of the life waiting for me outside that moment. But the reminders felt distant, like facts I'd memorized rather than truths I lived inside. At some point he said something quietly, something meant only for me. It wasn't flirtation. It was worse. Recognition. He saw the version of me that felt unfinished, and instead of looking away he stayed there. With me. I laughed it off. I always did. Humor was my shield. If I could make it light, I could keep it harmless. That's what I told myself as my pulse thudded in places it shouldn't have. As heat gathered under my skin for no reason I could explain. When we finally parted, there was no dramatic goodbye. No promise. No touch. Just a look that lingered a fraction too long. Long enough to feel intentional. I told myself I'd forget him by the next morning. I didn't. That night, lying beside a life that felt familiar and distant all at once, I stared at the ceiling and felt something inside me tilt. Not desire exactly. Something quieter. A pull. A question I didn't want to ask but couldn't silence. What if I didn't stop this? The thought scared me. And the part of me that didn't push it away scared me even more. Because somewhere deep down I already knew the truth. I wasn't waiting for permission. I was waiting for the moment I'd stop pretending I didn't want it. I told myself I was in control. That lie became easier every time I repeated it. We started finding reasons to cross paths, nothing obvious, nothing that would look intentional from the outside. Small adjustments to schedules. Lingering a few seconds longer than necessary. The kind of choices that feel harmless because each one on its own barely counts. But my body kept betraying me. I could feel it the moment he entered a room. A tightening low in my chest. A subtle awareness spreading through me. Like my skin was listening before my ears did. I hated how instinctive it was. How little effort it took for him to pull my attention away from everything else. We never talked about what was happening. That was part of the danger. Silence gave us permission. Every unspoken thought made the air heavier, charged with things we were both pretending not to notice. One afternoon we stood side by side, close enough that I could feel heat through fabric. My arm brushed his accidentally, I told myself. I expected him to move away. He didn't. Instead, he shifted slightly, closing the space rather than widening it. My breath caught. Not dramatically. Just enough for me to notice. Just enough for him to notice too. I should have stepped back. I stayed. There was a moment, brief, electric, where neither of us moved. I could feel my pulse everywhere. In my throat. In my wrists. In the quiet places I tried not to think about. My thoughts scattered, replaced by a single dangerous awareness: he knows. Not just that I wanted him, but that I was choosing not to stop it. When he spoke, his voice was low, careful. He said my name like it meant something private. Something earned. My response came out softer than I intended, like my body had already decided before my mind caught up. I went home shaken that day. Not with guilt. Guilt would have been easier. This was anticipation. It sat beneath my skin, restless, making everything else feel muted and dull. I caught my reflection in the mirror that night and barely recognized the look in my eyes. It wasn't confusion anymore. It was permission. And for the first time since this began, I didn't ask myself if this would go too far. I asked myself when. The first time we were alone together, the silence felt deliberate. Not empty, charged. Like the room itself knew it was holding its breath. I remember the sound of the door closing behind us. Soft. Final. My chest tightened instantly, not with fear, but with the awareness that there was no one left to perform for. No roles to play. No distance to hide behind. Just the two of us standing there pretending this was still accidental. I kept my arms folded like that could keep everything contained. He didn't move closer. That was what made it harder. He gave me space, and somehow that felt more intimate than touch. Like he was waiting for me to decide who I was going to be. We talked about nothing important. Familiar things. Safe things. But every word felt like it had another meaning underneath it. Something we were both careful not to say out loud. My heartbeat was so loud I was sure he could hear it. I wondered if mine sounded like his, steady but strained. Controlled but barely. At some point he looked at me differently. Not openly. Not hungrily. It was quieter than that. He watched me like he was learning something. Like I was revealing myself without realizing it. I felt exposed. Seen. And instead of retreating, I felt myself soften. I dropped my arms. A small thing. A meaningless thing. Except it wasn't. My body shifted, weight settling onto one foot, angling toward him without permission from my mind. I noticed it happening and didn't correct it. That's dangerous, he said quietly. Not accusing. Almost gentle. I knew exactly what he meant. I should have laughed. I should have pretended not to understand. Instead, I swallowed and met his gaze. Held it. Let him see the conflict moving through me. The fear, the want, the part of me that was already tired of resisting something unnamed but undeniable. I know, I said. The word landed between us and stayed there. He didn't touch me. That was the cruelest part. He stayed exactly where he was, close enough that I could feel his presence like pressure against my skin, but far enough that every inch of distance felt intentional. That was when I realized the truth, sharp and unavoidable. This wasn't about temptation anymore. It was about choice. And I was standing right at the edge of one I knew I wouldn't walk away from forever. After that, everything felt different even when nothing was happening. I started measuring time by when I might see him next. Mornings carried a low hum of anticipation I pretended was just caffeine. Evenings stretched longer than they used to, filled with thoughts I didn't invite but never turned away. I told myself I was still behaving, still within some invisible boundary. But the truth was, my mind had already crossed places my body hadn't yet followed. We exchanged messages that looked harmless if anyone else read them. Short, careful, almost boring. But I could feel what lived between the lines. The pauses before replies. The way a single sentence could stay with me all day, warming something under my skin that had gone quiet in my life. When we were near each other, the restraint became physical, tangible, like holding a breath for too long. I noticed how often my hands curled into fists, how my shoulders stayed tense, braced for a touch that never came, but felt inevitable. I wondered if he felt it too, or if I was projecting my own hunger onto his calm. One evening we stood close again. Too close. There was no door this time, no dramatic moment. Just proximity. Familiar now. Dangerous in its normalcy. I could feel the air shift when I leaned in slightly, so slightly it could still be denied. He noticed. I saw it in the way his jaw tightened, the way his eyes darkened for just a second before he looked away. That should have been my cue to stop. Instead, I whispered his name. Not loudly. Not pleading. Just enough. He exhaled, slow and controlled, like he was steadying himself. When he looked back at me, there was something new there. Not urgency. Acceptance. As if he'd reached the same conclusion I had and finally stopped arguing with it. This is getting harder, he said. He meant resisting. I knew that. And I didn't contradict him. I should have said something responsible. Something final. Instead, my silence answered for me. My body answered for me. The way I stayed. The way I didn't create distance. That was the moment I understood something that left me trembling. Not with fear, but with clarity. I wasn't being pulled into this anymore. I was walking toward it. The next time there was no pretending. We didn't say it out loud, but the shift was undeniable. Like a door left open too long, letting something irreversible settle into the room. I felt it the second I saw him. The way his attention found me instantly. The way my chest tightened, not with nerves but with recognition. We were alone again. Not accidentally this time. I had known exactly where I was going. I had chosen clothes more carefully than usual, stood in front of the mirror longer than necessary, arguing with myself right up until the moment I didn't anymore. The air between us felt thinner. Every movement louder. I was acutely aware of my own body, how it reacted to his nearness, how easily my composure slipped when he was close. I hated how natural it felt. How right. He stepped closer. Slowly. Gave me time to stop him. I didn't. When his hand lifted, not touching yet, just hovering. I felt it everywhere. My breath stuttered. My thoughts blurred. The space between us felt unbearable, charged with weeks of restraint and unspoken decisions. I could have ended it with a word. A step back. A reminder of who I was supposed to be. Instead, I looked up at him and let my eyes answer. The contact was brief. Almost nothing. Just enough to make my knees soften. Just enough to confirm what we'd both been denying. Heat spread through me. Immediate and overwhelming. Like my body had been waiting for permission it finally received. I closed my eyes. Not because I was overwhelmed, but because I didn't want to see myself choosing this. He whispered my name again, closer this time, and it sent a quiet tremor through me. My hand moved without permission, finding his arm, holding on like the ground had shifted beneath me. I felt his breath change. I felt mine disappear entirely. That was when the last illusion fell away. There was no more almost. No more what if. Only the undeniable truth settling into my bones. I had crossed the line fully now, and I wasn't turning back. After that, the waiting disappeared. Not the tension, but the hesitation. The internal bargaining. The voice that kept saying not yet. That voice went quiet, replaced by something steadier and far more dangerous. Intention. I started noticing how easily I slipped into this other version of myself around him. Softer. Warmer. More honest than I'd been in years. I didn't rehearse my expressions anymore. I didn't brace myself. I let my reactions happen, and he read every one of them like they were written just for him. We didn't rush. That surprised me. Desire was everywhere, thick, undeniable. But we moved with a kind of careful reverence, like we both understood that slowness made it more real. Every moment stretched. Every pause carried weight. When he was close, my body responded before I could stop it. A quiet lean. A breath held too long. The smallest movements felt loud, confessional. I was acutely aware of my own vulnerability, how much of myself I was offering without words. There were moments I almost pulled away. Not out of regret, but out of fear of how deeply this was settling into me. How it wasn't just heat anymore. It was presence, attention, the kind of closeness that makes you forget to protect yourself. He noticed when I faltered. He always did. And instead of pressing forward, he slowed. Let me decide. That was the cruelest kindness of all. Being given choice when I already knew what I wanted. My hands trembled when I finally let them rest against him, like my body was acknowledging the truth my mind had been circling for weeks. I felt grounded and unsteady at the same time. Exposed. Awake. I realized then that this wasn't something happening to me. I was participating. Fully. Willingly. And the thought that should have stopped me, the thought of everything I stood to lose, felt distant. Abstract. Less real than the warmth between us. Less real than the way my heartbeat seemed to sync with his. That's when I understood how far gone I already was. Because even knowing the cost, I didn't want to be anywhere else. I remember the moment I stopped hiding. Not from him, from myself. We were close enough now that distance had lost its meaning. The air felt warm, heavy with everything we hadn't said and everything we no longer needed to. My awareness narrowed until there was only this. The sound of our breathing, the quiet intensity in his eyes, the way my body responded without hesitation. I didn't rush. I didn't look away. Instead, I let myself be seen. All of it, the want, the certainty, the part of me that had stopped pretending this was a mistake waiting to be corrected. My pulse thudded low and steady, like it had finally found a rhythm it recognized. I felt exposed in a way that wasn't embarrassing, just honest. Stripped of excuses, of distance, of denial. His gaze held mine, searching, asking without words if this was real. If I was still choosing. I answered by staying exactly where I was. By letting my stillness speak louder than movement ever could. There was a strange calm that settled over me then. Not relief. Not guilt. Something deeper. Acceptance. I wasn't balancing on the edge anymore. I had stepped fully onto the other side and the ground didn't give way. I knew what this meant. I knew what waited beyond this moment. Consequences I couldn't soften. Truths I wouldn't be able to take back. But standing there, wrapped in the gravity of what we were about to become, none of that felt immediate. What felt real was the way my chest rose and fell, the way my skin seemed to hum, the way my silence invited him closer without a single word. I let him see everything. And for the first time since this began, I didn't look for a way out.